thought it'd be very useful to do is just to read through this first section with you and try to give you an idea of what I mean about method and all the rest of it. Okay, he starts off simply saying, the wealth of societies in which capitalist mode of production prevails appears as an immense collection of commodities. Individual commodity, elementary form. Our analysis therefore begins with the commodity. Okay? This is the a priori beginning point, which we've already mentioned. But notice something about the language. Appears. Always watch out when Marx uses the word appear. Appears is not is. Appears means there's something else going on, and you better watch out and figure out what that something else is. And notice also that in this, he's exclusively concerned with the capitalist mode of production. He's not concerned with, ancient modes of production or socialist modes of production or even hybrid modes of production. He's going to be concerned with a capitalist mode of production in a pretty pure form. And I think that is a very important thing to remember when we're reading through this text. So this is our beginning point. Now, when you think about it, it's actually a very good beginning point. Why? How many of us in this room have never had any experience of a commodity? Everybody has had experiences of commodities. Did you see one today? Did you see one yesterday? Are you constantly shopping for them? Are you constantly wandering around and looking at them? The thing there is that what he's done is to really choose a common denominator, something that's common to us all, and something we know about. We go into the shop, we buy it, and it's absolutely necessary to our existence. We can't live without consuming commodities. We have to buy commodities in order to live. It's a simple relation as that. So we start with that, and the other great thing about it is, and again I'll probably get some flack for saying this, is it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or a Japanese or an ethnic or a religious or whatever it is. In other words, it's just very simple kind of economic transaction which you're looking at. And then he kind of says, well, what kind of economic transaction is it? Well, a commodity is something, he says, which meets a human want or need. And he says, I'm not interested, and this is the cryptic form of it. He says in the next paragraph, okay, something external to us, which we then make ours in a way. And it satisfies human needs of whatever kind. The nature of these needs, whether they arise, for example, from the stomach or the imagination, makes no difference. In other words, he's not really interested in psychologizing about it. He's laying all that aside, saying, I'm not really interested in why people buy commodities. They can buy it because they want it, they need it, they desire it. They can buy it for fun or out of necessity or whatever. I'm not interested in talking about all of that. All I'm interested in is the very fact of simply somebody buying a commodity. And he then goes on and says, well, look at this. How many commodities are there in the world? Well, there are millions of them, all made up of different qualities, and we all kind of assess them in terms of different quantitative measures. And he again shunts this aside and says that the discovery of these ways, and hence the manifold uses of things, is the work of history. So also is the invention of socially recognized standards of measurement for the quantities of these useful objects. The diversity of measures for commodities arise in part from the diverse nature of the objects to be measured and in part from convention. The usefulness of a thing makes of it a use value. First big concept, use value. It's useful to you. I'm not interested in discussing how it's useful to you. I'm not interested in discussing the history of use values or anything of that kind, or the way in which they're measured, this kind of thing. All I'm interested in is the concept of use value. Notice how he's abstracting very fast. And he talks in one of the prefaces about the problem for a social scientist like himself is that you can't go into a laboratory and isolate things and run experiments. So what you have to do in order to run an experiment is to use what he calls the power of abstraction. And you see immediately the commodity is central. I'm abstracting from human wants, needs, and desires. I'm abstracting from any consideration of the specific properties of things. And I'm just going to home in on the fact that, in some sense, this commodity has something called a use value. And this then immediately leads him into, down the bottom, by the middle of the page 126, he says, in the form of society to be considered here, i.e., within a capitalist mode of production, they are also the material bearers of exchange value. Again, watch this word bearers. A commodity is a bearer of something is not to say it is something. It is a bearer of something which we've yet to define. And how do we think about it? Well, when we look at exchange processes, geographically, temporally, what we find is an enormous kind of process of exchange, of market exchange. We see different ratios occurring between shirts and shoes, depending upon the time, depending upon the place. We see different quantitative relations between bushels of wheat and pairs of shoes and tons of steel and that kind of thing. So the first sight, what we see in the realm of exchange is exchange values which are incoherent. They're all over the place. As he says, exchange value appears to be something accidental and purely relative. And consequently, an intrinsic value, i.e. an exchange value that is inseparably connected with the commodity inherent in it, seems a contradiction in terms. But we notice something about this world of exchange, that everything is in principle exchangeable with everything else. And what this immediately implies, as he says on page 127, is that you're always in a position, having exchanged something for something else, to then exchange what you have just got for something else. In other words, you can just keep on exchanging. So a thing can keep on moving so that it can be exchanged for all the other commodities at some point. And if that is the case, he then says, on 127, it follows from this that, firstly, the valid exchange values of a particular commodity express something equal, And secondly, exchange value cannot be anything other than the mode of expression, the form of appearance of a content distinguishable from it. That is, if I have a commodity in my hand, I can't dissect it and find out that element inside of it that makes it exchangeable with something else. No. It is exchangeable for something else, and I can't find out what makes it exchangeable just by looking at the commodity. I have to look at the commodity in motion. This is where we start to get in motion, in movement. I have to look at it, and as it moves, it's obviously expressing something about exchangeability, a commensurability in exchange. It means that all things are commensurable in exchange. Why are they commensurable, and what is that commensurability made up of? Where does it come from? How is it defined? And the commodity is the bearer of that something. But it is not inside of the commodity. It is borne by the commodity. It's a relation inside of the commodity, not a material thing. And he then goes through corn and iron and gets into one of his geometrical examples, but says, crucially, right in the middle of the page, each of them, as far as it is exchange value, must therefore be reducible to this third thing, whatever it is. And this common element cannot be geometrical, physical, chemical, or other natural properties of commodities, he says further down the page. Now, we're hitting something here which is rather significant. Now, Marx is often depicted as a sort of a grubby materialist. You know, everything has to be material. But here, what we're seeing immediately, he's not talking about the materiality of the thing at all. You can inspect the materiality of the commodity all you like, and you won't find out the secret of its commensurability and its exchangeability. You won't find it. And then he goes on the next page, 128, to say, as use values, commodities differ above all in quality, while as exchange values they can only differ in quantity. That is, how much of this exchanges for how much of that. And therefore do not contain an atom of use value. The commensurability that he's talking about is not constituted out of the utility of something. So he then goes to say, if we then disregard the use value of commodities, only one property remains. And here we're going to have another a priori leap. What's the property? They are all products of human labor. That is what they have in common. And what exchange values are, what and use values are bearers of, is that quality of being products of human labor. But he then immediately goes on to say, what kind of labor is it? Well, it can't be based on the fact that if I'm lazy and I take, 15 days to make a shirt, then indeed you should pay, the equivalent should be 15 days of your labor. When I can find somebody who's made a shirt in 3 days, I would change it. I would exchange with somebody for 3 days' labor. So he says, for the bottom of that passage, they can no longer be distinguished, but are altogether reduced to the same kind of labor, human labor in the abstract. Boy, this is moving very fast, very cryptic, right? Use value, exchange value. Human labor in the abstract And here it comes. Let us now look at the residue of the products of labour. There is nothing left of them in each case but the same phantom-like objectivity. Marx loves all this stuff about phantoms and werewolves and all that kind of stuff, so you're going to get a lot of that. He was a great admirer of Shelley and Frankenstein and all the rest of it, so you'll get a lot of that kind of language. It's great. They are merely congealed quantities of homogeneous human labour. Human labour power expended without regard to the form of its expenditures. As crystals of this social substance, which is common to them all, they are values. Commodity values. Okay, he's taken 4 pages to lay out 3 fundamental concepts: use value, exchange value, value. Value is what is passed on in the process of commodity exchange. It's the hidden element in a commodity that makes all commodities in principle exchangeable with each other. So he then goes on to say, well, having abstracted from use value, then we go back and look again at exchange value. We then see exchange value, as he says at the bottom of page 128, as the necessary mode of expression or form of appearance of value. Appearance, form of appearance, but this now you're looking at the other way. That is, there's something mysterious about the exchangeability of all of those commodities. There's something mysterious about the way in which all of those commodities can be commensurable with each other. And the mystery is that they're values. But values are represented now by exchange value. So exchange value, i.e. how much you actually get for the product in the market, is a representation of value. It's a representation of labour. Now, when you go into the supermarket, can you see the labour in the commodity? But it has an exchange value, right? Again, Marx's point is, yeah, they're all products of human labour, but you can't see the labour. You can't see the labour on the commodity, but you get a sense of what it is because it's represented by its price. So that is, if you like, so exchange value is a representation of something else. Now again, to say something is a representation of something is to not to say it is. Because as anybody will quickly tell you, the difference between the representation and what actually something is, there can be quite a gap. And Marx is going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the nature of that gap between value and its representation. So top of 129 he says, a use value or useful article therefore has value only because abstract human labour is objectified or materialised in it. Objectified. Again, a very important kind of concept. A process, in fact, a labour process, becomes objectified in a thing. This is an idea that's going to become very important in Marx. You have a thing, and then there's a labour process. What's the relationship then between the process and the thing? This is going to come up again and again and again in the text. Processes and things. The thing is a representation of the process. If you want a simple example of that, If I set an examination right now and made you write out a little paper as to what these concepts mean, and then graded you, I'd be grading you on the thing. What would it have to do with the process that's going on in here? And you might feel very, very, outraged that I graded you C or D or F or something like that because you haven't quite got it yet, when in fact you're struggling in the process. The intellectual labor process of trying to command what the hell is going on in this text. It's a very important thing. But if I try to test it as a thing, and actually education is full of this kind of problem. Education is about a process. It's about people learning things. It's about process, thinking, all this kind of stuff. And we're constantly testing how good people are in terms of that process by the things they make. Dissertations, essays, papers, multiple choice questions, all the rest of it. So what Marx is doing here is to say, well, the representation, i.e. the exchange value, is something which you can really, you really see, but it's representing something which is value. And as we will see, value is always in motion. And that means that a process is objectified in a thing. A labor process, a potter making a pot, is finally objectified in the thing, and it is the thing which is sold in the market, not the process. But the thing would not exist without the process. So the process has to be objectified. I mean, there are some people who'd love to write a dissertation without ever actually producing the thing. You can come in and say, oh, the process is great. Oh, yeah, okay, PhD immediately. But of course, no, you've got to objectify it. And as everybody knows who's gone through this to some degree, you can have great ideas and think it's fantastic, but when you try to objectify it on paper, you say, good God, what nonsense this is. And so you've got to, so Marx is talking about that relationship, but that's right that's implied in this, immediately in this notion of objectification. Human labor is objectified and materialized in this thing called a commodity. But then inside of that thing, the quantity is measured by the duration of the labor which is put into the thing. And that itself has measures, which he said, scale of hours, days, etc. Again, there's a reference here, coded reference if you like, to the way in which the capitalist mode of production sets up a certain notion of temporality, time. How does capitalist mode of production structure time? And Marx is going to make an argument and say, well, you've got to understand a lot of it has to do with the fact that time is money. Time is connected to value in a certain kind of way, and therefore even our measures of time start to take on a certain kind of allure simply because of the way in which a capitalist mode of production works.